These learning sessions are offered by MHAP to help people in the mental health community learn what we need to know to advance system improvement. And we also have work groups and host quarterly summits, which we'll talk about at the end of the call. This session is being recorded, as you can hear, and it's a resource for MHAP and for the mental health community in general. A link will be sent out in a couple of weeks to the people who are registered on this call. So we acknowledge that this is a tough topic for a lot of people. You or people that you care about may have had difficult interactions with law enforcement in crisis situations. And law enforcement on this call may have been put in situations where they had to follow policy or procedures that were set by law to put you in an awkward position. So the purpose of this session is to understand the current role of law enforcement in crisis and emergency detention, and to understand what officers are required to do by law so that we can more productively advocate for policy improvements to reduce the role of law enforcement in crisis. We feel that at MHAP, we know that the peer and family and provider perspectives are also very important as we move forward in our advocacy. But for the sake of time, today's session is just going to focus on the role of law enforcement. This section is structured to give you an opportunity to talk in breakout groups after you hear from our presenters. And for the last part of the meeting, we'll come together to share key takeaways from those discussions. So each small group will be facilitated by a CIT-trained law enforcement officer, and we'll have a note taker to capture the main points. So now I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. We are very fortunate to have 3 law enforcement officers who are trained in the Crisis Intervention Team, or CIT model, and we're dedicated to responding in a compassionate and effective way to people in a mental health crisis and the people in the surrounding, who are surrounding them. I'm going to introduce them briefly now, and then I'm going to turn it over to them for the presentation. So Specialist Sunny Snyder has been with the Waukesha Police Department for over 5 years. She's a CIT Coordinator, an ICAT trainer, a hostage negotiator, and a Iraq War veteran. She created and serves on the city's co-responder crisis response unit and the neighborhood engagement unit. And Officer Sheila Carlson has served for 8 years as a behavioral health officer with the Green Bay Police Department. She's a CIT coordinator, mental health first aid trainer, and Unified Tactics Instructor. She also serves on statewide committees dedicated to improving law enforcement and community response to crisis situations and decriminalizing mental illness. Deputy Leslie Fox has worked with the Dane County Sheriff's Office since 1998. She's also CIT trained and has assisted with the development of the DCSO Mental Health Team, partnering deputies with mental health clinicians for better response to mental health calls and proactive assistance to individuals and families affected by mental illness. So we couldn't have a better panel here. These are dedicated officers who really care about this situation. Sunny, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for being with us today. I'm starting us off with the first little section that we call role of law enforcement in crisis and emergency detention. So really, our role is to leave people better than we found them. Typically, when I'm giving presentations in our community, I always really like to start with, show of hands, who in the room has ever struggled with mental health, has a family member who's struggled with mental health, right? And pretty much every single hand always goes up, including officers, right? Because we are also subject to challenges and seeing difficult things and having loved ones. So we don't want to go into a situation and make it worse for anybody. That's never our goal. The issue is that because we're law enforcement, we are oftentimes put in the role of enforcer. First and foremost, enforcer can look like, right, we're the people putting you in handcuffs, taking you for the detention. If a clinician decides that, right, there's a 5115 that needs to be placed, we're the muscle that does that. And sometimes people, don't appreciate it. Also, with that, we've got scene safety precautions, right? So if there's any kind of behaviors, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's our job. First and foremost, make sure the scene is safe. Most law enforcement in the state of Wisconsin have limited mental health training. Most departments, at least in the Waukesha County area, and I think probably through most of Wisconsin, try to get every officer that they have through a 40-hour CIT training week. And then I know our department also advocates for like single day advanced CIT training. But when officers are going through the academy, there's really very little, if anything. We talk about professional communication skills, but we don't really train at depth about different mental health and crisis situations, at least not ones that are mental health related. Force, arrest, right? Criminal situations, of course. But that's really where we're coming from. The next area we kind of wanted to address was how, when calls come in to dispatch. So what does that look like, really starting from ground one? So most people think that you're an officer, you show up, you should know anything and everything at all times. Could not be farther from the truth. I don't think that the public appreciates how chaotic and confusing it can be. And depends on the call, that when dispatch is talking to you, they're frantically trying to type. Then we've got another dispatcher, trying to send officers at the same time. So like there is, of course, communication breakdown. Key things, even if said by the person who called 911 or the non-emergency, could just get missed or not heard. Right? Even if it makes it from dispatch to the officer, once officer gets on scene, it's hard, to keep every single fact and every single name from the initial call that was created. So there's just breakdowns, and that's just the nature of the beast. And unless you've experienced that, it's maybe hard to understand how crazy that can be to be part of. We need to, when people are calling dispatch, the other big issue is that we need good information. We need to have good information. So if you are calling and it's you or your loved one is struggling with something and they have a specific diagnosis, whether it be schizophrenia or bipolar, maybe it's a loved one with dementia who now is suicidal, a child with autism, throwing out those diagnoses can really help us just at least ground ourselves. Like, okay, this is what we're walking into a little bit better. Also, we need to know if there is, at least in Waukesha City, and I think most places throughout the state, we have things called special needs forms. So if there's a particular way to build rapport, for example, your child has autism and they love baseball. On the special needs form, you can fill it out for your child and you can say, Johnny really loves baseball. If you respond to the house, please talk about baseball and he will engage with you. That's gold. We love that. There's also things like safety plans, police plans, advanced directives, knowing things like, does the person have guardianship? Is there an activated power of attorney? All that is really good information in a crisis to have and to let dispatch know. Also, there is the NAMI guide to navigating mental health crisis on their website that you could please refer to. Doing a plug there for that. That will help you just see a little bit more of key information to give. The other big thing, I told you guys already, scene safety as police officer, number one. So knowing what weapons are currently being held or utilized or that are in the home. So typically, even if somebody isn't holding a firearm, we will ask, or dispatch will ask you, is there a firearm in the house? Is it locked up? Where are the keys? Does the person have access? If you're calling and your loved one has a knife in their hand, is it a butter knife? Is it a butcher knife? Have they already cut themselves? Have they cut somebody else? All really important information to help us figure out how we enter that home and what level we should be at, whether, high alert, high concern, or a little bit more calm to start. Also understanding that whatever specific behaviors are going on, are they just calmly sitting on the couch holding a knife? Are they screaming and making threats while holding a knife? Just what are you clearly observing that you think would be important for officers to know? Then, along with this, just recognize that, people call police officers literally for everything. If you have a problem and you're not sure who could fix it or who would be better to contact, they're going to call police. So recognize that if you call 911, you will be receiving a police response. If you feel like you don't need a police response, but you just need some help navigating some behaviors, we would ask that you please redirect that to 988 or your county crisis, just to talk it through, recognizing that depending on the behavior that you're sharing with those entities, they might advocate or just go ahead and call police to respond if they think there's a safety concern. So, but it's a better way to reroute it if you think that you're safe in the home or in the situation, you just need some additional support. If the threat level is low, like we said, you don't have to call police directly whatsoever. You can just go ahead and call crisis. Also, once we get on scene, if police end up responding, if everything is calmed down and we don't need to transport for you, if you feel like as a family member or as a friend that you can do it safely with the individual, we can always scale it down, right? Just because police are there doesn't mean we keep ramping up or that we have to still be involved in every possible scenario. We are more than happy to let you handle your business so long as it is done safely and to the benefit of everyone else. So, all right, Miss Sheila, you're next.
Now can you hear me? All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to talk to y'all about scene safety, or at the scene, I'm sorry. At the scene of a crisis, kind of covering down on some of the stuff that Sunny had talked about. Safety is paramount for the individual, for the loved ones involved, for the bystanders. Sometimes we're in a public area, what have you, and for law enforcement as well. The higher the threat, the higher the response, right? That's what you're going to see. So if we know that there is a firearm involved, if we know that there's a knife involved, something along those lines, you're going to have a more escalated police response. Like Sunny had said, once those things start to de-escalate and calm down, you will see a lesser police approach after that point. But our main priority is always scene safety. That's the first thing that they teach us. So right off the bat, we're looking for weapons. We're looking for active threats. A lot of times you'll hear cops when they first walk in say, I need your hands out of your pockets, out of your sweatshirt, put your hands up so I can see them, something along those lines, because that's where things are carried, right, in our hands. Other things would be maybe on the waistband area, that kind of deal, because that's where those things are held on to. The other things are unknowns, things that we don't see or we don't know. So you may have an officer or officers complete a safety sweep of the residence. Is there anybody else in the house? They'll maybe go through, check through some open rooms, what have you, in other areas. Verifying that anybody needs medical treatment. When we walk in, is somebody injured? Do we need an ambulance there? Did you already ask for one? Is it priority to the point where we need to get that person to the hospital right now, and then we de-escalate from there or figure out what is going on from there? So prioritizing and triaging that call as the situation breaks down. Once we get the scene safety, we get the safety sweep done. We're ensuring that everybody is accounted for, and medical treatment isn't to the point of needing to rush to the hospital right now. I'm not slapping a tourniquet on somebody. I'm not providing naloxone to somebody, something along those lines. Then we start the de-escalation process. So that could be anywhere from having to secure somebody in handcuffs because they're escalated to the point where I need to physically control this person so nobody else gets hurt, right? So again, we talk about how hands hang on to weapons. Hands are the things that are hitting us a lot of the time. So controlling the hands would more likely than not reduce the amount of likelihood for any further threat if it's that escalated of a situation. So then once we have that situation more safe again, then we're going to usually separate individuals that are triggering each other. So we're separating the 2 individuals or 3 individuals, what have you, whatever the stressor is in that case, we're going to separate that from the escalated party. So then we can better figure out what is going on. Is mom a trigger for kiddo? So we have to have mom go to a different room or outside while we work with kiddo in that type of situation, whatever it may be. And sometimes that can be really challenging because when you care about somebody and that person is in a traumatic state or in an escalated state, I should say, you want to know what's going on. You want to make sure they're okay. And you don't know me from Adam. And I get that. I get that you don't know who I am and you don't know totally what's going on. But my job is to make sure that everything is safe. So I'm gonna do that. And I'm gonna work through that. But again, I know that it can generate some anxiety for both parties. But we're going to try and separate so we can reduce the tension, allow the calm to work through, and figure out what our options are. So we work through our problem solving options. From there, we're going to figure out, do we need to go to crisis? Do we need to go to the hospital? Do we need to get a safety evaluation done? Is this person staying home? What exactly is going on like that? And it can be one of all of the thousands of options that we have. The true cop answer would be, it depends on the situation. And that's exactly what it's going to be. So in an instant where we have to transport somebody to crisis to get a safety evaluation, what have you, are they voluntary? Are they being forced to go? These are all different challenges that we work through as law enforcement to know what our legal authority is in these concepts. In the statute, it's plain and least restrictive means appropriate for the individual. That's what the Chapter 51 would say. So if it's least restrictive for that person to have a safety plan, maybe we'll just set up a safety plan right there on scene with loved ones and family members to say, I'm cool taking care of my loved one. I just needed help calming things down because it got too out of hand, what have you. Okay, we can make that conversation happen if it's appropriate, if we deem it safe and the individual is okay with it as well. Secondary, are they voluntary? Are they willing to go somewhere? If they are, is the loved one able to drive them? I'm always going to try and promote that at the end of the day because back in my squad car sometimes isn't always the most trauma informed. We have plastic seats in ours. I know a cage can be intimidating, that sort of thing. But at the same time, sometimes somebody's not safe to ride with their loved one. So would they feel more comfortable coming with me? That kind of thing. So figuring out what works with that family the best. If they're being legally compelled, if they're being forced, if they're coming into my squad car, more often than not, that individual will be handcuffed and they will be patted down. We have to make sure that every single person that gets in our car does not have a weapon on them in some way, shape, or form. So if you're being forced to go, you will be checked for weapons. If you are in custody for the purpose of an emergency detention, at that point, then you're going to be checked again, and again in handcuffs. And I know that can be a point of contention, but the reason being that if you're not in handcuffs, you are in the back of my squad car, and I have detained you or have some sort of physical control over you. If something happens because I didn't take precautionary measures, could I get in trouble for that? Could I get jammed up for that? And now am I pulling over on the side of the highway to fight with you in the back of my squad car because I didn't take that precautionary handcuffing in the first place? And so at the end of the day, it's going to depend on the department. It's going to depend on their policy, procedure, et cetera, like that. But I would almost just prepare to either watch your loved one be placed in handcuffs or be placed in handcuffs. And again, it's a safety paramount situation. It's not us trying to criminalize it. It's not us trying to demean you. We will do what we can to make it the lesser restrictive option, to make it so it's as trauma informed as possible. And I understand that handcuffs just aren't that, and they're probably never going to be trauma informed. But up until that point, if there's a safety concern, if somebody's in the back of my car and it's me making sure that they're safe, I'm safe, and everyone else is safe, then I'm going to have to use the most appropriate option for that type of situation. When it comes to going to crisis, compelling that person to go, that kind of stuff, if I'm forcing somebody into my car and I'm forcing them to go get an evaluation, that means that there's a substantial probability of physical harm to self or others, majority of the time. Unless there is some outlying circumstance of a basic needs issue or an impaired judgment issue, but your primary one is going to be the substantial probability of physical harm to self or others. So again, it's a lot of times people are struggling with, why aren't you forcing my loved one to go? Why aren't we doing these things? Because something's going to happen. If I don't have legal authority to be able to take that person into custody, I cannot compel them into my car. And I think I've covered all of my stuff. So I'm going to switch it over to Leslie.
Thank you. I'm going to cover 2 sections right now, and that's going to talk about transport from the hospital to like the hospital for the med clear to like a psychiatric hospital to like a Winnebago mental health, and sort of what that looks like for the transport. So Sheila touched base on the handcuff issue. Typically for policy reasons, we have somebody that's in our custody for the purposes of an emergency detention, and we're transporting them, typically in my case, out of county. So they will be handcuffed and searched again to be in the back of my squad car. For that purposes, we don't put hands behind the back. We're able to use some sort of a belly belt. We have like Velcro rip restraints, and they will be handcuffed in the front, which is a bit more comfortable when it comes to handcuffs. And then also typically we use leg shackles as well for the transport. Again, the purpose of that is to reduce the risk of harm to that person and also to others. We like to, and most people like this as well, we can easily get a wheelchair and put them in the wheelchair for the comfort out to the squad car. It's a little swifter and a little more comfortable for them, so they don't have to walk in the shackles. Like I said, they'll be searched again. We will take with us any medical paperwork and personal belongings that is needed for the next stop. We'll take that with us and make sure we don't forget any of that. Out of county transports for us are always 2 deputies. It is fully recorded audio and visually for the entire transport, and that is saved as well into our system. So we do the best we can to make the person comfortable, even in little ways. Temperature, music, what do you like? We'll do the best we can for the transport up there. From my county to say like a Winnebago can be anywhere from like an hour 40 to about a 2-hour drive or so. And I know in other parts of the state, it's much longer than that. We make sure like they've used the restroom prior to transport, and that all of their basic needs have been met prior to us leaving from the med clearance facility. We also explain to them what the next steps will be once we get to our next stop, such as a Winnebago mental health. So they're not surprised with what the next part of the process is. We're happy to chit chat the entire way of the transport if that's what the person likes. Oftentimes we've spent a lot of time with that person in the emergency department, and so we've done a lot of rapport building, and I've had some good conversations. Some agencies, not mine personally, but do utilize third-party transports if they have that in their funding for their budgets. So sometimes at that point there are other persons that come in and do the transports, but just know that that is not available in every jurisdiction. It is very pricey from what I hear. So most of the time it's going to be law enforcement officers doing that transport. I do find that after the long hours at the hospital for the med clear and looking for the bed, that a lot of people actually fall asleep during our transports on the way up there. It's sort of an adrenaline dump, and they kind of, I think the lull of the drive sometimes after all that overstimulation. We have a lot of people that fall asleep. We now have like half cages in the back of our squad, so it's full kind of clear plexiglass. It feels to me a little more open for that person, maybe not so claustrophobic. They can see us easier and vice versa. And the venting is better to make them more comfortable. So just those little things to try to help it make a little bit of an easier transport, I think is helpful. Again, it's very easy if we're doing a med clear in the emergency department and they just have to go upstairs maybe to that hospital. That's really quick and easy, and security will help escort us up there with our person. But a lot of our emergency detentions go to Winnebago Mental Health. So I'll briefly describe kind of what that looks like. So I've kind of gone through what the transport might look like. When we arrive at Winnebago, we will go right to the intake building, which is one of the main buildings there. Again, if the person's comfortable with that, we'll use a wheelchair to get them into the facility a little bit quicker. Intake is very smooth and quick. They get a picture of the person, they sign several different pieces of papers, insurance, and some other things that's required by Winnebago. They do stay handcuffed until they're through the intake process. We will get an escort from security to the assigned housing unit. Sometimes that's in the same building as intake. And sometimes we need to place them back in the squad car for literally less than a minute to drive to one of the other outer buildings that are there. It just sort of depends on if we have a juvenile or a male. There's different buildings there. So that's a very short drive to get there, usually under a minute. Security will escort us there. At Winnebago, in the housing units, there are no weapons of any kind allowed. So we have to remove our guns, our tasers, our knives, all of our weapons that we have on our belt. That is not allowed in the housing unit. So we will lock those up appropriately to escort the person to the housing unit. Once we reach the housing unit, staff will come out to greet the person that we're with, including nursing staff. They'll ask them a question such as, do you feel like you can be safe? And then after that, we will do all of the unhandcuffing and leaving them to the staff there. We immediately disengage after that occurs, and security escorts us back out. I would like to say for our mental health unit at the sheriff's office, we typically check in with either our person or a family member, depending on the situation, maybe a week or so later, and just kind of check in, see how everybody's doing. How is the person doing? Do they want to share how the hearing went? And if there's further planning they want us to be aware of, and just kind of do that check-in to see how everything went and if there's anything else that we can help them out with. We know a lot of the people that we take. Sometimes we have repeat calls for service with them. So there are community members, a lot of people we know quite well. We are invested, we care about them. And so that's why we do those check-ins after the fact, because we may or may not have additional calls with them. So we try to do that checkup after the emergency detention as well if they want to engage with us then. So, all right, I will turn it back over to Sunny.
All right, so then the next section I'll be going is just some of the required procedures. So the first one is just tasers. We like to talk about tasers because they look, the optics of it isn't great. I will tell you that as far as I know, every single officer when they go through police academy gets pepper sprayed and gets tased. So we know how it feels. We know what's going on with it. It is, when used appropriately, does not create harm. It's like a bee sting. When it goes into your skin, it's like a bee sting. If it goes into any kind of sensitive areas, we always have ambulances remove it, properly from those areas. Where people can get hurt with tasers is, if they're falling on cement or anything like that, rather than grass or on a carpet. Now, the issue to understand is that when somebody is actively resisting, meaning they're not being cooperative, we need to take custody of them. Let's say the person is being chaptered. They do not have the freedom to go away. They want to fight with us physically about it. We are trying to get them handcuffed to maintain that safety, but we are not able to for whatever reason. Maybe the person is quite just bigger, right? Big, tall, big guy with two smaller lady cops. Dynamics are a little bit different, for example. And so tasers are used as a tool to quickly and safely get somebody under control so that we're not having to escalate. We're not throwing punches. We're not pulling a gun, you know, heaven forbid, depending on what the situation is. It's really important for everybody to understand that the taser is an opportunity for us to very quickly shut it down, because the more you tussle and wrestle and fight with somebody, the more people get hurt. Not just the person in crisis, but officers, family members, bystanders, right? And safety is our number one concern. So we do use tasers to do that. Just repeating, dispatch, how the call comes in. When you call 911 or you call police, you are setting the tone. So set it right. Use your words. Give us a clear picture to the best of your ability of what we are walking into. It will help everybody concerned. Also recognize, Sheila was talking about this too, we need to do least restrictive. Sometimes we will have family members be super upset with us, and man, do we understand sometimes how this can go, you know, where a family member will want the person chaptered because they don't really believe that the person is going to be voluntary. Or they don't want to do a safety plan, right? That it can be very disappointing in some situations to do least restrictive. But because we are a state that fully honors and recognizes people's individual rights with their mental health, we must do least restrictive. So that will always be what we do. And in most situations, just recognize too, it's not officers who are making that decision with 5115s. It is typically a clinician who is making that call, and officers are in charge of taking them into custody then. And then just a quick note on corporation counsel. So when somebody is chaptered and they are at that psychiatric facility, they are awaiting basically mental health court is how we would look at it, or somebody that figures out whether or not the person needs to be on a commitment, if there could be a settlement agreement, if they're just going to be released back home with nothing more, nothing less, you know, just spend a day or two at the psychiatric facility. The corporation counsel, whatever they decide, that is for the county. So just as an example, if we are able to have somebody on a commitment, a corporation counsel has agreed, yes, this person is going to be on a 90-day commitment, let's say. If that person on commitment leaves the county, these commitments in like Waukesha County are not honored in any other county in the state of Wisconsin. And also, if that person is gone, let's say for like 3 months, the commitment that existed in Waukesha County just like dissolves and disappears. Even if the person comes back to Waukesha County, it doesn't magically reapply. You have to go through all the same steps. I say this because this is another thing that's very frustrating for family members who are like, what is going on with the kind of repeated process? Or like, we've already been here. We know this doesn't work. Why are we doing this again? It is a systemic issue that we can face with that. So corporation counsel is not united statewide. It's county-based. So there will be changes and differences between those two. All right, Leslie.
Okay, we're going to talk about how to reduce trauma. And what I really wanted to focus on was trauma for the person in crisis that we've been talking about, and also for the caregiver. And the caregiver could be family, you know, loved ones. It could be a professional. I'm passionate about this, as many of us are. I really want to hone in on the pre-planning, being proactive, reaching out to your local police department, asking about a safety response plan, Departments could call that different things. It could be a police plan, a safety plan, some sort of a response plan. Police departments may have different approaches, but reach out to them and ask them what they can offer. A lot of places now have mental health officers, community neighborhood officers that can assist with this. And like in my case, that's a main goal and priority that I do in my job. Why are safety plans, why can they be beneficial? It gives officers a better understanding of who that person is. What is their life story? Why might they be generating police calls? It will help us improve our response to that person and help us make informed decisions if there is a police call. It can help prevent unnecessary involvement into the criminal justice system. And it helps us come up with an appropriate disposition that can be thoughtfully planned and also be consistent with that person's care plan. A lot of persons that we assist, they have a care team, they have behavior teams, and in some cases we're a part of that, so we can help remain consistent in that response when appropriate. Also, one thing I do a lot is if we do have a police response with someone that has one of these safety plans, we can debrief it afterwards with the team, with the person themselves, with the family, with the caregivers. What went well, what didn't go well, what can we change for the next time? I think that's really important. I think it's important for the person and also their family or that person, that the caregiver that might be calling 911, to be prepared, collaborate with the police ahead of time if they're able to. In some cases, the person has a say in their plan prior to that crisis moment. They can meet us outside of a crisis situation and have a voice in what that safety plan should look like. What are their hooks and triggers? What things do they think would be helpful for law enforcement to do or say in the moment of that crisis? What is the best way to approach them? And then we can also work with the entire family on safety planning. Are there weapons in the homes? Are there medications that need to be locked up? We can provide those medication lock boxes and also gun safety locks proactively, so we can just remove the weapon situation usually up front. Also with some of these safety plans, we can determine if a CAD alert, and a CAD is a computer aided dispatch, if an alert on the address would be appropriate. It gives deputies a heads up. Hey, there's a safety plan in place. This person is living with autism. They're living with dementia. Oftentimes, as we've talked about, sometimes these calls come out very active, weapon involved, someone's being hurt. And as Sunny went through, scene safety is the #1 priority. So I'm not, in those cases, stopping and pulling up the plan right away. We need to get there quickly and secure the scene before we can take a breath. And somebody or a partner that's arriving a little later can start to look at these plans. And we have access to them in our squad cars. I also think it's important to do mental scripting or rehearsing with the person that might need to call 911 in that crisis situation. Rehearse with them what to say during it, because it's so hard to call 911 when there's something active going on and it's really scary. But if you practice ahead of time and we can help you do that, it might lessen some of the anxiety of that. Oftentimes what I'm seeing is I have a person in crisis and a caregiver in crisis at the same time on the same call, and we're very aware of that. So to help reduce that stress and the trauma, I think being prepared ahead of time, and we can advise them here's some questions 911 might be asking you, and here's some things that you can say, and practice that ahead of time. Again, for that accurate information to dispatch that Sunny's been talking about. And also help them mentally prepare. What are some things you can do while you're waiting for police to respond? Are there additional safety measures that can be put into place that would be helpful in the event of a crisis? And also maybe keeping important information on the fridge or in a designated spot that you can give to law enforcement when they arrive. Also, the proactive approach, many of our teams, our mental health teams, are working with families ahead of time. We're working with our crisis workers. We're connecting people to resources. We can do home visits with people outside of a crisis. so they get used to the uniform. We can talk to them, building that trust and establishing that rapport ahead of time. And again, going over that mental rehearsing of what a police response might look like. And I have done this to include with juveniles, and then we have had a crisis situation after the fact, and it has been very helpful, and they've been able to articulate that afterwards. So helping to reduce the anxiety, and in some cases having that emergency information on file, which I have found is very helpful for persons living with dementia that might not be able to provide that information to us in a crisis scene. And again, just as a review, we've talked about using our CIT skills. Verbal and nonverbal skills are very important for law enforcement officers to have to help reduce trauma. And we've already talked about least restrictive, and we've talked about some other ways too, like the third-party transports could also help reduce trauma. Again, that's not available everywhere, but know that that is out there, and hopefully more to come in the future. And so I will pass it on to Sheila.
So I have your frequently asked questions, your facts. So we're going to cover down on like one of the primary questions that we get asked a lot. Why are you using handcuffs? We kind of discussed this a little bit earlier about safety and making sure that everybody is safe. The ability to control a situation as much as possible without having more people hurt or having to escalate to a higher level of force is by securing and assuring that the scene is safe, by then utilizing handcuffs. Also, with that liability piece, if you're in the back of my car, a lot of times you're going to be in handcuffs because if there is any sort of escalation in the back, I have limited control, sometimes having to pull over, tussle in the back of a squad car on the side of the highway. It's not desirable and it's not safe. So that's oftentimes why that will happen. Why am I being transported in a squad car? Leslie kind of hit on this one. The third-party transportation option can be costly. It's not necessarily accessible in all areas, and that's actually protected within the statute. If somebody's in custody, the only means that we can utilize is contracting with a third party or ambulance source, and it's oftentimes that it will be more accessible through a squad car. To get a soft squad, we utilize a soft squad from time to time, and it's just like a red minivan with a soft back seat, and those are for cases that we don't have the access to the third-party transport, because we would utilize that for a longer trip, but a local one being a 15 to 20-minute drive, we wouldn't pull out a higher priced vehicle for that because of the cost primarily for it. And then why is my loved one not allowed, or why am I not allowed in the room with my loved one? Let's say your loved one is in the hospital receiving medical treatment, that sort of deal. If they're in custody, you're not going to be able to go back and be with them. A lot of times it's to mitigate any further escalation in the hospital area. We've had people get hurt in the past by essentially a crisis re-escalating in that ER-based area, or there is sometimes physical altercations with nursing staff, such like that. And so trying to reduce harm as much as possible by limiting the amount of people within that very, very small area. How do we make this less traumatic? Leslie kind of hit on this a bit more, having those safety plans in place, having officers with CIT principles being able to utilize those things. Green Bay PD is one spot where we don't force our officers to go to CIT. We're starting to envelop in that a little bit more, but we do like to sustain the thought of if it's something you're passionate about, I want you to continue to get that training. So then when you do call dispatch and say, I want a CIT officer, this is a crisis situation, you get somebody that is enveloped and took that training very much so to heart and continues to work through those types of things. The overall goal, like Sunny said at the very beginning, was we got to leave them better than we found them, right? That's always the big thing that we get. We got to leave people better than we found them, regardless of what agency, what officer you get, that interaction sticks with you. So the rule of reciprocity, we are responding to something, somebody has a very negative interaction with an officer, that's going to trickle down to the next contact, regardless on what agency, what officer it is. At the end of the day, we understand that people see officers as a badge and a uniform, and that we're all the same, but we're truly not. And if there is a bad cop out there, nobody hates bad cops more than cops. And the agencies oftentimes will learn that and work through that. But I would just more or less ask that, keeping in mind that cops are still people. Like we're still humans. When I walk into a very high intense situation, just because I'm trained in a crisis setting, just because I'm trained in mental health, trained in all these things, doesn't mean that I don't get that emotional response. I don't want to see people going through the worst day of their life, but I'm willing to work on it with you, and I'm willing to work through it. And in order for me to use empathy, I have to allow myself to be vulnerable, which is me pulling in my humanistic factor. That's when you're going to get the most empathetic, vulnerable response from an officer. But know then that my emotions are in it, and so I am going to have some sort of humanistic response. So if you have an officer who seems like they're gassed and they're frustrated, it's probably because they are. It's probably not because of your situation. It's probably 3 calls prior to that they got run around through the ringer or something along those lines, or they had a really bad day at home and it was their first day at home with their family and it was a bad one, and then they came into work because they got pulled on so much overtime and what have you. So, and I'm not saying that has any reason why officers would be excused for poor behavior. I'm just asking that you see the humanistic factor behind it as well. Because I bleed just like y'all bleed. We all do, right? Some other things that I know that get brought up that's not on my sheet, I hope that's all right. But that I see often is, why can't you make my loved one go to the hospital, and why can't you force them to get treatment? Under the Chapter 51 statute, 5161G1, it's my favorite nursery rhyme, says that you cannot compel somebody to get medical or mental health treatment without a court order or without their permission, unless there's an active safety concern occurring. So if I bring a loved one to the hospital, if they are not going to imminently die or have substantial bodily harm, they cannot be forced medical treatment. Same thing with the psychiatric treatment. If you've had a loved one get held on a 51 or an emergency detention and they get released the next day and you're like, how could they release them? They're still not well. They're maybe still symptomatic and they didn't even give them medication. If the person is not dangerous, there is no court order, and they don't want to take the treatment, there is no ability to compel that person. And that's within their basic patient rights and their constitutional rights as well. So I do see that a lot where they're like, how can you release this person before they were able to get treatment? If they don't meet that court order standard, they're not going to get it. That's why we always tell you, like, we need a solid dangerousness factor. And I have people ask me, do I have to wait until something happens? Honestly, sometimes yes, and that's how our state is made up of the Chapter 51 statute, is we don't have a preventative option. And that looks different from Dane County to Brown County to Milwaukee County to every county in this state. You go to 72 different counties and you will get different answers as to how they detain somebody on a Chapter 51, and it's going to be 72 different ways. And so that's what's exceptionally frustrating about our state breakdown, but that's a legislative thing, and that's what's tough. And my last one, then I'll stop. Why can't you go into this person's house for a welfare check? Why can't you kick down my loved one's door? I'm worried. I haven't heard from them. They gave me this vague text last night, and I don't know if they're okay or not. The Supreme Court has very much identified that a person's residence is their castle. We have a higher level of need to prove that there is a purpose for us entering into that residence. We're no longer covered under community caretaker for a residence. We have to be covered by what's called emergency aid doctrine. A person is in need of emergency aid, emergency medical treatment, essentially, to get past that threshold. Mere suicidality is not enough for us to kick down a door, and that's been now through case law back in 2021. So I have people that call me pretty regularly and say, my loved one's not doing well. They're not making sense. Maybe they're confused, something like that. And I get there and I knock and they tell me not to come in. I cannot go in. These are just some things that we run into oftentimes where we have to have those longer, harder conversations with individuals. But that's what I'll leave it for. See that?
Hold on, Sheila, the only other thing that you're missing is that even if somebody's chaptered and we have chapter paperwork, we can't kick their door in, right? To get them.
Yep. Yeah. So unless the court order includes like a warrant for their residence, which I've never seen it. If we have authorization for custody and we have 51 criteria met, there is imminency and dangerousness, etc. Unless they're in need of immediate medical care, and we see or somebody has been able to report to us that this person is bleeding out, this person is actively overdosing, unconscious on the floor, something like that, it's not enough for us to go in. Not even on a hypothetical, not even on a spidey sense. I love to say, like, common sense police says, yeah, there's definitely something going on here, but constitutional law police says you're not allowed to investigate beyond this point.
Okay, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Sunny and Sheila and Leslie for some very straightforward, intense information. If you want a straight answer, ask a cop. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to go into breakout groups for about 20 minutes to discuss what we've learned. And I put some questions in the chat. There are some discussion questions. Each group is going to have a CIT officer who will facilitate the conversation, but this gives you a chance, in a smaller group to just kind of, talk about this and ask questions back and forth. And each group will also have a note taker just to capture the main point. We'd like to learn from your perspective. We at MHAP would like to learn from your perspective in order to inform our advocacy. And I have a feeling that many of you would like to learn more about these very intense situations that you face. So there are 4 questions that I'm going to read right now. What did you learn in this presentation that gave you a new understanding of the crisis and emergency detention process? What have you or others done in crisis situations that made the situation better or worse? What can we do? How can we do a better job educating the public about this process? And what steps do you think Wisconsin can take to improve the process? So for the sake of time, the discussion is going to stay focused on the discussion questions, but if you have additional comments, please put them in the evaluation that will be at the end of this session. And then after the breakout rooms, the 20 minutes, we'll come together again and talk about our key takeaways. So now we're going to open the breakout groups. If there's a join button, go ahead and press. Welcome back, everybody. I know we had a really good discussion in my small group. I hope you did too. So I'm going to call on the small group facilitators and just ask each one of you to say 1 or 2 things that happened in your group, or 1 or 2 things that came up in your group. And then we'll just kind of open it to see if anybody else would like to contribute. So I will see, is Sunny here?
Yep.
All right.
Yes, I am here. So I think the first thing I'll share, because it came up for a couple people, is just the not understanding why we're not taking people at their word, even if they have kind of a vague inkling that somebody might be in crisis or overdosing or whatever, and how we're not just kicking in the door and going in. So one of the things that came up from that is talking about, and Sheila, help me out because I butchered this. I just still remember it as community caretaker, but what is it changed to now?
It is, emergency aid doctrine.
Thank you. Emergency aid doctrines. We decided that probably educating people about what the emergency aid doctrine has got to say, right, statutorily, that police officers have to follow would be important because it was very concerning to people without that. And I also made it clear that we're applying that across the board. It's not just mental health calls. It's for any kind of police call where that would be appropriate. The other thing that we talked about that I personally found from the police officer side very impactful is that one of our members discussed a traumatic experience seeing a child hit by a car on a bike, and she had tried to jump out of her car to assist the child and realized at one point that she was just kind of screaming her head off at people, and having her own trauma response, really, is how I took it. And that was a good opportunity for me to say, police officers go through that all the time. The only difference is, she had said that she then removed herself from that situation because she's just a civilian bystander. She recognized she wasn't able to add something positive in the moment. But for police officers, even if we have the same kind of trauma response, seeing a child get hit by a car is hard for anybody. I don't care who you are. We still are expected to perform and do our job at a certain level. So it was this wonderful opportunity to humanize kind of what we're doing. So those are mine.
Thanks, Sunny. Sheila.
For some reason, I struggle with this audio button in here. I don't know. So we had a little bit of audio issues, so we were working through that the first bit of ours. But once we got through it, I'm trying to find the questions. So what did we learn? The thing that was brought up was commitments and understanding how they work from county to county. The breakdown of how it's not a statewide commitment. It's just isolated for that county. So if somebody is sent elsewhere, it will not transfer for that same county, and the same legal expectations behind it. One of our members had discussed for the second question, what have you done in crisis situations that's made the situation better or worse? And that was just allowing time, space to let the situation de-escalate, let the person breathe. We talked about how simple breathing is exceptionally impactful for a person, specifically in the biological component of they go from the emotional brain, and breathing allows you to then oxygenate that blood flow, which then brings you to the good decision-making brain, and then we're able to problem solve more effectively. And that's only done usually through time and either a bottle of water or a cigarette, depending on the person. So oftentimes cops will use gifts, not gifts, to try and de-escalate that situation. With education, we just talked about doing these types of conversations, allowing for y'all to have access to cops on a more comfortable level. I had brought up, like, when I was talking to Cito when we were starting today, that we were not totally sure what we were going to get, kind of deal. But we had a really positive conversation. So I appreciate that.
Thanks so much, Sheila. Leslie.
A couple takeaways. We did some clarification about Dane County options for involuntary commitments and what the local hospitals can take. Somebody brought up that good understanding now in the safety planning and the benefits of that. We had a couple good suggestions on making the situation better, talking about that separation again, kind of like Sheila was just talking about. And in some cases, it was brought up in a homeless shelter type situation, separating from maybe the audience that's there, so that person in crisis can kind of be separated like that from the rest of the people. And then also it can help with the scene safety for law enforcement, as you might be coming in and there might be 20 other people that want to talk to you at that same time. And then also somebody brought up staying on the phone with their client or their person as 911 was being called, to make sure the information was accurate, and they felt like they had another support person on the line there as they're hearing the sirens coming and our police response. And then we got into a conversation about peer respite and the importance of that and the success that they're having with peer respite, Solstice House in particular here in Dane County. That kind of got us into number 4, and then we ran out of time.
Thanks, Leslie. Officer Goran Gerald.
Sure. So I didn't realize it was on a timer either, so we ran out of time for the last two. It sounds like the biggest thing that we focused on was one person brought up they were thankful to hear about our expectations as law enforcement when we can forcefully enter a residence. So that was good news to get out. They said that would help them explain to family members as their role in the community, why we can't do certain things. Some things that it looks like room for improvement was a concern was brought up that we respond to what dispatch tells us, but we sometimes need to do a better job of realizing that what dispatch told us maybe isn't accurate anymore and transitioning from the higher level response because of a mention or of weapon or aggravated behavior that that's no longer happening, and it's time to tone down the response and be a little more trauma informed. So it sounds like some people in our group had seen or heard of experiences where that didn't happen and the officer stayed at that high level response longer than they should have, it sounds like, just based on the summary I heard. So just officers transitioning to a lower level response faster sounds like room for improvement. And then one thing that we kind of circled back to and some people mentioned might be good as some steps that Wisconsin can take to improve the process is that more clinician teams, like we had a person that said maybe that's not the answer based on experience they had, but overall it seemed like more clinician response teams where officers and a clinician go together would solve a lot of the concerns that were brought up.
Thanks so much. Deputy Harum.
Yeah, we had talked about getting officers CIT trained and how there's grants for that, but how the evidence is it's better for people to volunteer for that because they take the training more effectively and therefore, take the training more to heart. And then we focus a lot on the emergency detention process and frustrations over the elongated med clears, how that's both for the person being ED'd and the officers there, and sometimes the lack of communication between the hospital and what labs have been taken and where we're at in the process and what we're still waiting for. And Winnebago possibly making things go too long and seeing how that could be streamlined. So we did a lot about that. Frustration over legislation that Winnebago really is the only place that can take everybody, and how if that was more community-based, that would be better. Some more of, quote unquote, forced beds where they would have to go more locally as opposed to just a one spot in the state.
Thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Deputy White. Jackie?
Yes, hi. One of the things a member in my group talked about that they found beneficial was learning about the transport to Winnebago process, what that looks like. That was helpful for them. And we also talked about how beneficial it is, of course, to have a CIT-trained officer. This member in the team lives in Madison, and they have a care team, which does not include a law enforcement person. It's firefighter and other people that you can call when you're in crisis. And I guess they're adding more of those in. And that was very helpful for her to have someone who really understood and was very well trained, which I think, in my opinion, you can get that from a CIT officer, but, of course, it depends on the officer as well. And then as far as educating people in the community, I guess I had a little bit of a light bulb there that I thought it would be good if like my co-response team would get together with our local NAMI and maybe see if we can arrange to have some kind of a presentation for a group of their clientele, maybe their family group or something of that nature when they get together, and we can come and we can answer their questions and kind of explain things to them as well. And then we ran out of time as well. So we had started talking about the med clearance process, and then we ran out of time.
Yeah, clearly that we could have a lot more conversation on this, and we may in the future, very well may. And then Officer Woodman, I don't see him.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, there you are. Great.
Thanks. So we had pretty lengthy discussion on some really good like pre-planning measures when it comes to NAMI's family to family meetings and inviting law enforcement in to not really like have law enforcement say what we do, but actually like establishing that communication is the way that I took it. Right in the beginning, outside of the time of crisis, so we can talk to family and family can ask us, and really setting forth that communication, establishing those safety plans, what we would like to see, things of that nature, and what family members want to see from us. The other thing that we talked about was pretty significant lack of communication when it comes to multiple times that law enforcement shows up for the same client, not having, or the family's frustration when it comes to that lack of communication. What, you didn't know that this happened 3 days ago, that sort of thing. So that was, I understand that those issues happen, and that's on us to try to mitigate and mend some of those issues that come along. We talked a little bit about advocacy and treatment courts or mental health courts, what we can do, and just trying to get the word out, collaboration between law enforcement and the public to try to make sure that those measures are taken or stepped up. And then one of the questions was if we had any representation from the Milwaukee area, and I said I didn't know, but I was asked to ask a question, so I'm asking.
Yeah, we do have some folks from the Milwaukee area in the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks so much, everybody. Please join me in thanking our wonderful presenters and the facilitators and the note takers. This was a jam-packed session. I hope it was helpful to you. Like I said, we will have future topics on, maybe a different take on the same topic in the future. A brief announcement before we wrap up. MHAP is finalizing our policy proposals, some of which are address some of these issues. So we're finalizing our policy proposals for the upcoming legislative session, and we're going to host an online summit on December 11th from 9 to 12:30. If you're interested in participating either in the summit or joining an MHAP work group, we have various work groups that hammer this sort of thing out, or just being added to the MHAP list for future learning sessions, please email Julia Polk. I'm just going to put her email in the chat here. And then finally, please take a moment to fill out our very brief evaluation. That link is now in the chat. We look at all of this sort of stuff very seriously. We take our cues from you. And so, please tell us what you think. Tell us what was good. Tell us what else you would like. And we'll act on it. So with that, have a wonderful evening, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a great Thanksgiving, and be well.